global supply chains are getting tested already. We're seeing how freight orders have been delayed, been canceled because of all the uncertainty. Let's get insight from one company that's right smack in the center of global supply chains. DHL CEO Tobias Meyer is with us. Tobias, good to have you with us. We've been talking about how, electronics have been exempted, at least for now, the 90-day delay. How much reprieve really is that giving to trade?
I think, Linda, we need to see what now is really happening. Obviously, there are certain goods that have been in transit, and for those companies, for those customers of ours, this is a big relief. It is a bit unusual that the relief was retroactive, so backdated to April 5th. So there's also now some work to be done with customs in terms of rewinding this. What's going to happen going forward is very uncertain. We heard those comments from the President of the United States earlier that they are looking now at electronics from a different angle of security, national security, the Section 232 of the U.S. Code. So I think for our customers, there's still a lot of uncertainty out there.
Yeah, the thing is, tariffs are coming. It just depends on how high they are. I'm just wondering, in terms of activity, are you seeing customers front-loading exports? What are you seeing?
I think in the last wave of tariffs being announced, that was not as big as we expected it, and as we've seen it in the past. I think people are getting really a bit tired. They don't know, even if something's announced, whether 2 days later it's not changed again. So you really see some fatigue of decision makers in manufacturing and also in the distribution sector. Where's
the pain being felt the most? Is it in the U.S. market?
Well, what we've seen is when in February the de minimis was gone, those shipments under $800 that currently don't require formal clearance, don't attract duties and taxes at all when it comes to imports in the U.S. When that was gone, the number of entries that Customs and Border Patrol had to process basically doubled overnight, and that was a real operational hurdle. I think now it's more customers, manufacturing companies trying to figure out where to put production, where to put inventory to best position themselves, and that's something that's very difficult to do.
So what are some of the considerations? Where are they thinking? What might it look like?
Well, I think there is the consideration what the administration of the U.S. is going to factor in. So whether they clearly they have the consumer in their mind. They don't want to see a big product launch being delayed, for instance. So that seems to be part of the calculus. It's very hard, though, for our customers to figure that out. So I hear a lot that customers simply say, we'll wait for now.
I love your website because you were trying to explain to your customers how to deal with the uncertainty. But you have decided to actually open a pharma hub in Singapore, right? At a time when we're also hearing from Washington that pharmaceutical tariffs could come in a month or two, according to the Commerce Secretary. So how are you positioning, and how does Singapore play into that?
Well, Sherry, we have a clear strategy laid out for 2030 where we want to invest in several growth vectors, and life science and healthcare is clearly amongst that. So we see that as a secular trend, and we want to stay on that. We also have to bear in mind when it comes to global trade, 75% of global trade has nothing to do with the U.S. It's not U.S. inbound or outbound. So that continues to grow, especially the trade in Asia grows. And this is why we're doubling down on those areas. Life science and healthcare, and Asia is top of our agenda, and the Singapore investment absolutely fits into that.
Not only Singapore, but I heard at one point you were trying to hire more in Malaysia as well, given, of course, the ongoing trade ramifications in the United States. How will this really affect your business performance, and where you allocate more hiring and perhaps even layoffs in the next few years?
I think that's hard to say. Again, there are some areas that see structural growth. A third of our revenue by now is related to e-commerce, for instance. We have a leading position when it comes to the international transport, warehousing, and distribution of pharmaceuticals. So those things, those sectors, we continue to heavily invest in. When it comes to the more short term, the capacity sizing in our hubs, for instance, how we deploy aircraft, that is something that we in these days need to handle on a week-by-week basis. We have significant airlift capacity in our DHL Express network, and this is hard work to redeploy those assets to make sure we can offer the transportation capacity where it's needed.
Tobias, you got to wonder, are there now more disputes about who will pick up the tariffs, who will pay the cost, the additional cost that we're expected to see?
Well, firstly, I'm worried about the decision-making being delayed, and that, those investments not being made, that will lead to some shortages somewhere at some point. So that's a negative for the global economy. I think that's clear. As it relates to the consumer, Linda, we have to see. The American consumer has been quite robust when it comes to these clear signs of volatility. Now, a lot is still to be seen when fashion now really becomes more expensive in the U.S. That's not a critical item, so people might just reduce. When it comes to more industrial goods or also consumer electronics, that is hard to substitute. So a lot of uncertainty, also for us, hard to see how these trade flows are going to develop.
In the end, consumers will pay a higher price, though. That's the assumption.
Of course. I mean, if you charge an additional tariffs or taxes, they need to be paid by somebody, and that's the consumer ultimately. Now, whether this is offset by other measures, tax reliefs, is to be seen. But clearly, this is an additional burden on the U.S. consumer.
In the broader scheme of things, I continue to hear the uncertainty about your prospects, from every business leader that we speak to, but perhaps mostly when it comes to logistics company, to DHL in particular. When it comes to really trying to map out a broader vision for the next few years, does that affect some of your targets? Like last year, you were talking about a 50% rise in revenue by 2030. Would that affect it?
No, Sherry, we remain quite bullish because we have a higher market share in the 75% of global trade that are not related to the U.S. Traditionally, our market share in and out of the U.S. is relatively low. We have domestic activities that are very strong in the U.S., which we don't think will be much impacted by this. And again, we have growth sectors that we believe will continue to deliver good growth. The energy transition is fully going on in the rest of the world. Wind turbines, solar cells and panels need to be transported. E-commerce continues to be a secular trend. People buy more online. They don't want to spend that much time in the shops. That's a global phenomenon. And that's what we as DHL focus on. This is why, yes, the changes in U.S. trade policies are tiring for all of us. It's clearly a key agenda item on the day-to-day. But as it relates to the midterm growth prospects for DHL, I'm not worried.
But how do you make forward planning? I mean, there's so much uncertainty. How can there be clarity and for you to come up with, the numbers and the projections ahead? And linked to that as well, Tobias, I'm just wondering, are you in a war footing? I mean, do you wake up every morning, gather the troops together and reassess, discuss what's the strategy ahead? Because there's so many changes on a daily basis.
We stay calm on this. We have operational colleagues who have a very busy day, and I'm glad that they get up every morning and tackle the challenges that we have in clearing shipments into the U.S. for our customers. So that is clearly a very intense time for those colleagues. But as it relates to the fundamental trends that we're trying to take benefit of, people in Asia are going to age. There's great progress when it comes to pharmaceuticals, and that leads to a combination that requires better logistics, more cold chain logistics for our pharmaceutical customers. And that's not going to change because of your trade policy.